Are you participating in that meeting? Can you hear people talking? I hear a thing. What's wrong with my audio?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the orientation of 2021 rate card, orientation session number 1. And so we are glad that you're here with us, and we will be reviewing the agenda for today. Today we will be presenting the first module of 2-part training session on the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood 2021 rate card. Today's session will be focused on introducing the rate card and providing an overview of each metric. Details on the implementation processes, data systems, and use of the rate card payment funds will be covered in the second module, which will occur tomorrow at 1 p.m. Today, we hope to cover who we are as an organization, provide some background on our engagement with OEC and prior rate card work. Offer an overview of the 2021 rate card, including discussion of metric details, and then outline next steps. Today's meeting will also be recorded for later viewing. To the extent you have questions throughout, please feel free to insert them into the chat. If we do not answer them throughout the discussion, we will do our best to document and answer these questions afterwards. And as part of your introduction, I noticed that people are already introducing themselves in the chat, and that's great, and the program you're with. We have an icebreaker question for you if you would like to answer in the chat. What was your favorite childhood book? If you can take 1 or 2 minutes to do that, that would be great. And then I'll pass it over to Sophie.
Thank you, Luz. And hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you today. I do want to do a quick check and make sure that the recording is happening, because I saw a note in the chat that made it look like the recording might have stopped. So just wanted to confirm that on the OEC side, but maybe while someone looks into that, I will keep talking. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Deere, and I am a director with Social Finance, and just briefly wanted to give you an overview of who we are at Social Finance, why we're talking to you today, and about our partnership with OEC. So Social Finance is a national nonprofit that works at the intersection of impact finance and advisory work with governments. And our goal is to bring a focus on data-driven work and insight of our partners in government, adjust and transform public systems to focus on measurable and equitable outcomes. Our work focuses on scaling effective social service programs, like all the programs that you all work on in home visiting, and really focus on improving outcomes for individuals and families. We work across a number of different issue areas, and our projects include an array of different tools. And since 2017, so going back 4 years now, we've worked with the Office of Early Childhood to design and implement several outcomes rate cards in home visiting, and that's going to be the focus of our discussion today. I also am loving seeing some of the books that are popping in the chat, and so I will briefly introduce myself again and then pass to my 2 colleagues who joined me today to introduce themselves. So my name is Annie Deere, and like I said, I'm a director of social finance. I've been with the organization about 6 years and have had the great pleasure of working with OEC for the last 4 of those years. And just for good measure, I really love the book, Where the Wild Things Are, when I was a kid. And I will pass first over to Danielle to introduce yourself.
Hello, hopefully you can all hear me. My name is Danielle. I'm an associate director in the social finance team, have been engaged with OEC and supporting some of their work for, I guess, a couple of years now. And I guess my favorite childhood book, though maybe not childhood anymore since I continuously reread it, is just the Harry Potter series. And now I'll pass to Priya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Priya, and I am an associate with social finance based out of our San Francisco office. And my favorite childhood book is Alice in Wonderland.
Awesome. So there's a lot to cover today. So we will kind of keep moving and start with a little bit of background on what is an outcomes rate card. Some of you are probably very familiar because you've been doing this work for years, but also the kind of history and context of how OEC got into this work. So a rate card is first and foremost a procurement tool, and through which a government entity like OEC defines a list of key metrics that it wants to see happen and the amount it will pay each time a given metric is achieved. So ultimately, rate cards are financial incentives that service providers can receive in addition to base contract values. That's our definition slide. So what does that actually look like? We wanted to kind of talk about our history of partnership with OEC and the sort of history of working on rate cards together. So as of July 1st, OEC uses ECIS to determine if a rate card metric has been achieved. And for each caregiver that achieves a metric requirement, providers will receive a payment. Metric achievements will be determined on a quarterly basis, and payments will be made semi-annually. So this means that every 6 months, OEC will pay each service provider the total sum of all metric achievements for caregivers served during the prior 6 months. So in other words, the prior 2 quarters, which we know is how a lot of you kind of think about your reporting periods. All payments are bonuses on top of your base contract value, and in total you can earn up to 4% more than your base fiscal year contract value. The OEC is offering this 2021 rate card to reinforce the outcome and population priorities for home visiting, which were articulated in the RFP, to reward you for your continued service to families and communities, and ultimately to strengthen the data feedback loop between OEC and the home visiting network. So that's kind of what this is. Sorry, now I'm going to get to the history of our partnership, because I hope some of that sounds familiar to many of you who've been doing a version of this for the past several years. So going back in time a little bit to 2017, with support from a federal grant, our team at Social Finance offered technical assistance to state and local government partners around the country to develop rate cards, and OEC was one of our earliest partners. Back in 2017, OEC articulated really an agency level commitment to trying out some outcomes-based contracting strategies and engaged Social Finance to design a rate card. Based on an assessment that we did together of all the different programming that happens at OEC, the different funding streams and programs, we determined that the home visiting portfolio was one of the strongest fit for rate cards because it's relatively stable and flexible funding source because of the strong links to evidence of effectiveness of the work that you all do, because of really strong historical data and the strength of the current data systems in terms of tracking programmatic progress and outcomes, and because of upcoming contracting and procurement opportunities, and then ultimately the kind of commitment of the OEC team that in the Family Support Division to support and lead this work. After we did some early design work in 2017 on the first rate card, which OEC launched with, I'm sure many of you, for some MCV funded providers in 2018. And since then, rate cards have evolved several times. I think we're at 4 or 5, depending on how you want to count. And this presentation today is about the latest iteration offered to all home visiting contractors and that started on July 1st. All right. So before we get into more about the kind of rationale of the rate card, just again wanted to chart the path through time. So we've launched 5 rate cards over the last few years, again with the great partnership of many people on this call. These pilots have really tested the data flows, developed different versions of contract language, and identified certainly plenty of operational challenges with implementing a rate card. And based on that experience, we've adjusted the design of this version and tried some new approaches. This latest rate card unifies the home visiting system, much like this recent procurement, for the first time. So unlike prior versions, this is the first rate card that's just offering one set of potential payments to providers for each time caregivers achieve metrics. And those opportunities are the same regardless of the home visiting model that's delivered, what your funding source is, or the characteristics of a given caregiver. So it's a much more unified structure. We also wanted you to know, in case you don't, that Connecticut has really been at the forefront of the use of this tool of home visiting rate cards. And it's actually kind of leading the way for a lot of other jurisdictions that have following in your footsteps. So we at Social Finance have seen that a similar approach has been used in the years, following Connecticut's start of this work. It's been used, we've seen in Missouri, where the Children's Trust Fund of Missouri, which is the state of Missouri's kind of foundation for child abuse prevention, has designed a rate card to better demonstrate impact across its home visiting system, incentivize prenatal enrollment, and improve overall data entry and data processes. We've also seen a similar approach in Texas with support from a local healthcare foundation, the Episcopal Health Foundation. We're working with their state Department of Family and Protective Services, the Prevention and Early Intervention team specifically, to embed outcomes-based practices into their contracting and management processes. And finally, in Michigan, we have worked with a county agency in Kent County called First Steps Kent, which is the Grand Rapids area, to develop rate cards that were included in a county level initiative to advance early childhood development and include some outcomes around home visiting, infant health, and environmental health. So I know that there's a lot happening in Connecticut itself, but we just wanted you to know how the work that is being done here is actually spurring really interesting and impactful work all around the country. All right, I will pass it over to Jen, I think.
Yep, I'm right here. Thank you. And so the big question, why? Why the OEC offers the 2021 rate card. The rate card theory of change states that offering financial incentives to providers for focusing on key outcomes strengthens service delivery, it improves system level performance, and it generates family level impacts. So Social Finance partnered with the OEC to design the rate card. We considered agency level, and I want to send a special shout out to all of the agencies who provided their honest feedback and support throughout this process, and state policy priorities, which include focusing on priority populations, moving services upstream, and emphasizing two-generational impacts. So the latest rate card reflects these goals. First, emphasizing the recruitment of priority populations. Second, to seek to support families prenatally and postnatally, and focus on education and employment as families are still impacted by COVID-19. Additional adjustments made to this rate card from previous rate card iterations for those who were involved in previous years are as follows. All contractors are using the same rate card. The rate card is not differentiated based on model or funding stream. We use historical data to establish achievement rates to develop payments, but of course we acknowledge that the 2021 rate card includes metrics that will not be achieved by all families. And lastly, the 2021 rate card offers one set of prices rather than differentiating based on risk of families. Next slide. So how the rate card works, if it could all be this simple, right? And it will be, because this is, for some is old hat, and for others, we're going to be here to support you through this process. As a reminder, or as a preview for those new providers, the rate card operates just like this. So providers serve families, conducting activities as usual, and submitting data into ECIS. Next, the OEC uses reports submitted by providers, backed by ECIS data, to determine metrics have been achieved. Then the OEC disperses payments semi-annually. So this is different for you guys, for the sum of all metrics achieved from the previous 6 months. And lastly, providers then receive those payments and can use the funds as OEC and your organization shall deem allowable. So ultimately, the rate card provides the opportunity to earn additional funding, can improve service delivery by spotlighting key areas where you might not be achieving metrics, and is one way to articulate your impact moving forward. Next slide. So some rate card success stories. Some previous rate cards supported providers to improve service delivery by providing additional resources like some job fairs and really cool things like that, right? Service providers also use those funds for professional development and to improve service delivery. So 2 really specific examples. One home visiting provider worked with a mom who was unemployed after the birth of her child, who wanted to become a nurse. The home visitor helped the mom set goals to become a certified nurse assistant and attend nursing school, while also helping her child receive services through Early Head Start and Care for Kids. The mother's on track to graduate from nursing school. How cool is that? Additionally, a home visiting provider had success helping mothers complete job training and obtain employment, and has increased the mother's self-worth and achieve independence. So 3 examples of use of funds: purchasing personal protective equipment in light of the new strand. This is never going to grow old, right? Another home visiting provider used funds to support doula services. Such a great idea, and it's going to be extended and expanded. And then another home visiting provider purchased iPads for service delivery. And so this is like the #1 question that people ask: how can we use these funds? And so there are some guidelines that will be provided for you guys to kind of help. And if you have any questions before you spend a dime, just drop a line to your program liaison, and you can easily ask if it's allowable, and we can get back to you. So thanks.
Sounds great. So before we get into the good stuff on what exactly the rate card is, wanted to make the session a little bit interactive and pull you guys on your experiences with the rate card itself. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen with the slides and actually share online. If everyone can go in a separate tab, either on your phone or on your screen. And I will share my screen with you so you see what it looks like. So you can go to at the top here where it says menti.com and type in the code, and you can be pulled up straight to a poll question. And we would love to hear from the folks here on this call. Has your organization participated in a previous rate card before? So I'll give you all a couple minutes to, oh, perfect. We have a couple that are right on it. So I'll give you a couple minutes to head into menti.com, type in the code, and then you should see a question that allows you to answer yes or no. You can submit right away. Okay, seeing the majority of folks have had some experience, but for some this is new. All right, I'm seeing a little less movement, and you can keep this tab up because we'll have a couple more polls moving forward as we get into the details of the metrics themselves. But I'll actually just turn back to my screen with the slides to walk through what the rate card looks like. All right. So what does the 2021 rate card cover? So here's the rate card itself. There are 4 metrics that are included: key population enrollment, prenatal enrollment, caregiver education and training or employment, and then prenatal and postpartum care. At a high level, these metrics were chosen, as others have mentioned, because they align with OEC's priorities for home visiting, can sustain long-term impacts for families, and then can be defined and measured through the existing ECIS system. These metrics, of course, represent areas where OEC has specific goals, but are not intended to cover sort of the full scale of what home visiting services do offer. And thus, providers, you are not expected to achieve each metric for every new enrollment or every family. These metrics just emphasize specific areas where there are OEC priorities. So I'm going to walk through each metric and then we'll pause if there are specific questions afterward. But first, we have the key population enrollment metric. This is achieved anytime a provider enrolls any mother, father, or other caregiver who identifies as Black or African American, Puerto Rican or Native American, or who is less than 20 years of age upon enrollment. This metric was selected and defined to focus on groups who have been traditionally underserved through decades of systemic racism in particular and have resulted in health disparities by race. Just looking at Connecticut's Department of Public Health data, for example, we know that infant deaths per 1,000 live births are nearly 3 times more common for Black versus white mothers, and preterm birth rates are over 40% higher for Black versus white mothers. And so OEC is committed to not only improving outcomes at a population level, but also focusing on specific subgroups. And this metric intends to really focus attention on enrolling families who can be engaged in culturally appropriate care through home visiting services. The next metric is prenatal enrollment, and this is achieved anytime a provider enrolls any caregiver prenatally before 32 weeks of pregnancy. As articulated in OEC's last procurement, OEC is hoping to engage families earlier and move services upstream, and one way to do so is to engage families earlier in their pregnancies. The third metric is caregiver education, training, or employment, and this metric can be achieved each of the 4 quarters in a year. And this can be achieved for any caregiver who either enrolls or maintains enrollment in an education and training program, and that can look like a high school degree or job training or a specific program like that, or attains or is retained in employment working at least 20 hours per week, or who graduates from an education and training program. And this metric was chosen, as was mentioned earlier, to really focus on 2 generational impacts and support families to increase incomes, particularly as Connecticut and the rest of the world, frankly, recovers from COVID-19, which has resulted in sort of an economic downturn. And so this metric is intended to support families achieve their educational or employment-related goals. And then the last metric is prenatal and postpartum care. And this is defined for any mother, father, or other caregiver who enrolls before 32 weeks of pregnancy, completes at least 3 prenatal visits with any healthcare provider, and that can be a virtual visit, completes at least 1 postpartum visit, and then 1 well-child visit within 8 weeks after delivery. And so similar to the prenatal enrollment metric, this metric is intended to really focus attention and supports on that crucial and early prenatal and postpartum periods. So here we've also listed the price per outcome. This is the price for each caregiver who generates or achieves that outcome. And then also we've listed the annual maximum per caregiver, noting that that's the same for metrics 1, 2, and 4. The only difference is that for metric 3, that this can be achieved each of the 4 quarters within a year. So the annual max is a bit higher. And again, these are payments that can be achieved on top of your base contract values. And so don't expect this to be done for every single family that engages in your program, but it's sort of an added benefit. So how will the rate card be used? So broadly speaking, the rate card is intended to reinforce prioritized families and outcomes and focus on family level impacts. Of course, it's intended to reward and recognize all the work that you do in serving families, particularly during this time. The rate card itself is also aims to strengthen the data feedback loop. So Jen walked through how this works. It's obviously a process between providers and OEC, and so it seeks to strengthen that system. And then it also hopes to foster collaboration and communication across the entire home visiting network by focusing on a couple key metrics as well. Of course, the rate card is not fully encompassing of everything within the home visiting system. So it's not the only way in which OEC will look or track performance across providers. There are a whole host of other, as you're aware, other metrics that are calculated and collected through ECIS. So other quantitative data will be looked at, as well as other qualitative, anecdotal, or other types of feedback that you provide as well. As mentioned, the rate card payments offer bonuses on top of existing contract values. So if metrics are not achieved, they do not cut into contract values themselves. The rate card also, by focusing on a couple key metrics, is not intended to shift how you operate your models or shift operating your models with fidelity. They're simply there to draw specific attention on key areas. And then lastly, and we'll get to this in the subsequent rate card orientation session, but the rate card here only adds 2 new fields to ECIS. And so it's not going to revamp what that system looks like on your end or significantly alter what the data collection processes look like. So I'm actually going to we're going to go back and forth between slide and Menti. So apologies in advance if you get dizzy, I probably will, but I'm going to stop presenting my slides here. I'm going to head back to Menti, and perfect. And then have another question for the full group, just hearing from you, which of the rate card goals do you think is most important from this initiative? If you have Menti still up, you might see atop of the screen, it might say go to slide in blue. You can just click on that if it doesn't immediately take you to the question that you see here. And this is just from your perspective, which of these goals you think resonates with you most strongly or think is most important as part of the system. We'd love to hear your feedback. I'll give it a couple more seconds. Seeing a majority around the second answer, reward and recognize.
Danielle, you're presenting, so you can't see that some people are responding to the poll in the chat.
Okay.
So there are some folk who are selecting foster collaboration, reinforce priority families. If you can pop over to the chat, you can kind of glean.
Perfect. Sounds great. So you can keep filling in responses either in the chat or online. And I'll move into the next section. So here we're going to go through each of the rate card metrics in a little bit more detail. So let's provide some more information on each metric one by one, and then, no surprise, go back to do a poll question for each of the 4 metrics. So you can continue to have Menti open or the chat open. So looking first at the key population enrollment metric, wanted to just emphasize a couple points of this metric, and you will have received full information on sort of all the fine detail, but a couple points you wanted to highlight is that this metric is defined for any newly enrolled caregiver. So it focuses on those who are newly enrolled after July 1st. This metric is open to any caregiver, mother, father, other who is enrolled in home visiting services. This metric can be achieved if the caregiver meets any of the identities that are listed: Black, Puerto Rican, Native American, or a teenager, which is defined here as less than 20 years of age. So if a caregiver identifies as, let's say, 2 or more races, such as Black and Native American, the metric is achieved, but only one payment is generated. So as long as you meet at least one of these criteria, you generate one payment. I wanted to also emphasize that this metric can be achieved once during the contract period. So if someone enrolls and re-enrolls, it's achieved once. So now we're going to move into another question, back and forth here. Going back to Mentee, you might see on your screen another question. That's which of the following caregivers would meet the key population enrollment metric? Again, you have to click go to slide if your screen is lagging. And here you can choose multiple options, but I'll just read them out. So the first caregiver, let's say, enrolls in home visiting at the age of 20 and identifies as Asian and Pacific Islander. Caregiver B is 22 at enrollment date and identifies as white and Hispanic, but not necessarily Puerto Rican. And then caregiver 3 enrolls in home visiting at the age of 21 and identifies as Black and Puerto Rican. And so the question is, which of these would meet the key population enrollment metric? So I'll give folks a second to think about it and then submit responses.
Danielle, I think people are probably submitting. It's not, at least what we're seeing on the screen is not updating with results. Maybe you're holding them back from us as people answer, but I don't know if a refresh might.
Oh, wow.
There we go. Awesome.
I was like, wow, I really stumped everybody. Okay, this is amazing. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds. So seeing a majority here are saying caregiver C. And I'll just say the spoiler now. Caregiver C is correct. This would meet the metric because she is Black and Puerto Rican, which meets the criteria, even though she's older than 21 or older than 20. Caregiver A would not achieve the metric because it's older, 20 years and older, and Asian is not included in the metric definition. And then caregiver B would not meet the metric because it's older than the age of 20, and although is Hispanic, is not Puerto Rican, and Puerto Rican is a specific criteria in the metric definition. All right, hope everyone's not getting poll fatigue because we have a couple more to go through. Yes, caregiver C is the correct answer. Moving on to the prenatal enrollment metric. This one's pretty simple, but wanted to highlight a couple points. This is eligible, caregivers are eligible if they are, again, newly enrolled after July 1st, and this is open to any mother, father, or other caregiver who's enrolled in the home visiting services, enrolled before the start of a 32nd week of pregnancy. And so the last day to enroll and be eligible for achievement is 31 weeks and 6 days of pregnancy. We also just want to note that, again, this is open to any caregiver. So let's say both a mother and father are enrolled as one family unit in home visiting. Each of them can achieve this metric if enrolling before that 32-week mark. But let's say if someone drops out and re-enrolls, they can only generate one payment over the contract cycle. So keep that fresh in your minds as we turn back to Mentee. And the question is, which caregivers would achieve the prenatal enrollment metric? Again, you can choose multiple options. The first caregiver is female enrolls at 10 weeks of pregnancy, drops out of the program at 22 weeks, and then re-enrolls again at 30 weeks. We have a caregiver B, male, enrolls with his female partner at 26 weeks. And then lastly, we have caregiver C, female, enrolls at 35 weeks of pregnancy. Seeing a lot for B in particular, quite a few for A as well, a couple of responses for C. I'll give it a few more seconds.
I don't know if you can see the chat, Danielle, but you have a handful of B's and 2 A's in the chat.
Perfect.
Few more B's. Yeah.
All right, looks like it's leveling off on my end. And without further ado, correct answers are both A and B. So both of these would achieve the prenatal enrollment metric. So caregiver A meets this metric because she enrolls before that 32 weeks. So even though she drops out, still meets that metric by the first enrollment. Just would note that multiple payments are not achieved here. So it would not get multiple payments for the 10 and 30 weeks before the 32 gestational week mark, but does meet the metric once. And then caregiver B meets the metric. Again, this is open to any caregiver as long as enrolled in the home visiting program. And then because it's before the 32-week mark, does meet the metric. Then caregiver C enrolls at 35, does not meet the metric just because it's a little bit later than the 32-week start time. All right, and I will give you a break from listening to me and pass it off to Priya to walk through the same sort of activities for metrics 3 and 4.
Awesome, thanks, Danielle. So moving on, we will now go over the caregiver education / training and employment metric. This metric seeks to build upon the 2 generational goals of home visiting, and it's a bit different from the metrics we discussed so far because it is not enrollment based or focused on caregivers who are newly enrolled in a 6-month period. Instead, this metric is eligible to any mother, father, or caregiver that was served during a quarter, which we're defining as someone who is enrolled in that quarter but had not yet exited by the end of the quarter. And you can see here that there are various criteria listed for this metric, either around enrollment in education, employment, or graduating from an education or training program. The metric is achieved if at least one of the criterion is met within the quarter. So multiple payments are not offered if multiple criteria are achieved, and continuous achievement across quarters is not required. And this metric is also different from the previous ones because it can be achieved once per quarter. So to clarify, if any of those 3 criteria are met at least once in a quarter, then it's achieved. And again, although the achievements are noted quarterly, the payments will be made semi-annually. So for this metric, each caregiver can achieve a maximum of 2 payments every 6 months or 4 payments per year. For the metric, it's achieved as long as a caregiver is recorded as being employed in an educational program or graduated with an associated date that falls during the quarter. There is no end of quarter verification necessary. However, while the date entered for a caregiver's education or employment must fall during the quarter for them to be eligible, the information can be entered by the user up to 15 calendar days after the last day of the quarter. A few more things to note here. A caregiver does not have to be enrolled in education or employed for the full quarter to achieve the metric. And they also don't have to be enrolled or employed in the same program or job for the entire metric. So again, we're just looking for that verification at any given point during the quarter. And for employment, the employer name and job title information must be filled out. It can be very generic if the family is not comfortable giving details. And also, if a caregiver is working part-time, they must work at least 20 hours per week to qualify. So overall, this metric intends to encourage providers to support families and to obtain and maintain secure, high-quality employment if that is a stated goal of the family or caregiver. If a family is not actively looking to work, then OEC does not expect families to achieve this metric. Great, so we can move on to the poll question. So for this activity, it's not a yes, no, but we're asking how many payments each of these caregivers would generate on an annual basis, because as a reminder, the metric can be achieved up to once per quarter. So I'll go over each of the options. So for caregiver A, in quarter one, they were enrolled in an ESL program. In quarter two, they were enrolled in an ESL program, graduated halfway through the quarter. In quarter three, they began working part-time 15 hours a week. And in quarter four, they were working 20 hours a week. And then for caregiver B, in quarter one, they were enrolled in high school, but they dropped out. In quarter two, they were not enrolled in high school. In quarter three, they were working full-time, and in quarter four, they were again working full-time. So once again, here we're looking for how many payments would be achieved by each of these caregivers. So essentially what you would have to do is look at each quarter, determine if they achieve the metric, and then calculate the number of quarters to find their total number of payments.
And to clarify, here we're asking which caregivers would generate 3 payments. So it's either both, none, or one are generating 3 payments in the year, and have to determine which do.
Great, looks like most of the responses have come in. So go ahead and give the answer. So in this case, actually, both of the caregivers would achieve 3 payments. I saw there were a lot of responses for caregiver A, but they both did. And the reason for that is we look at caregiver A. They would qualify in Q1 by being enrolled in a program. They would qualify in Q2 by being enrolled in a program, and they would qualify in Q4 for working at least 20 hours a week. So that's 3 payments. And caregiver B, they qualify in Q1 for being enrolled in high school, and then they qualify in Q3 and Q4 for working full-time. So once again, 3 payments. So we know that this metric is a little more complicated and has a bit more to understand in terms of the definition, but hopefully this was helpful to kind of start getting an understanding of it. Great, and then now we'll discuss metric 4, which is the prenatal and postpartum care metric. So this metric builds on metric 2, which was the prenatal enrollment metric. And only caregivers who achieve the prenatal enrollment metric are eligible for this prenatal and postpartum care metric. As a reminder, this means that only caregivers who newly enroll in a given 6-month reporting timeframe and who enroll prenatally before 32 gestation weeks are eligible. For this metric, we specify that at least 3 prenatal visits are completed before the baby's birth, and at least 1 postpartum visit and at least 1 well-child visit are completed within 8 weeks after delivery. We recognize that this is not a perfect clinical standard and that more visits are likely appropriate, but for the purpose of the rate card, we wanted to retain some flexibility. But we would definitely encourage you to specify that earlier and more frequent visits are better. If there are multiple caregivers in one family unit, so a mother and a father, that are both enrolled in home visiting and achieve this metric, then the family could generate multiple payments for the provider. And for the visits themselves, we note that virtual visits could count towards the metric achievement and visits with any healthcare provider. So doula, midwife, birth center, etc., would also count towards metric achievement. And the metric can only be achieved once per pregnancy if all criteria are met. So those are kind of the fine print for this metric, and then we can move on to the activity. Great, so for this activity, we are asking which of the following caregivers would meet the prenatal and postpartum care metric. So caregiver A, the mother completes 2 prenatal visits and 1 postpartum visit and 1 well-child visit within 8 weeks. And they enrolled before 32 gestation weeks. For caregiver B, the father attends 3 prenatal visits, 1 postpartum, and 1 well-child visit within 8 weeks. They enrolled before 32 gestation weeks. And then caregiver C, the mother attends 3 prenatal visits, 1 postpartum visit at 6 weeks, 1 well-child visit at 12 weeks, and also enrolled before 32 weeks. Great, looks like most people have gotten their responses in. So the correct answer is caregiver B, which I saw that most people got correct. So congrats. Caregiver A does not qualify because only 2 prenatal visits occurred. And caregiver C does not qualify because the first well-child visit was after 12 weeks. So caregiver B is the correct answer here. Great, so moving on. So we wanted to ask one more poll question now that we've gone through all the metrics in detail. On a scale of 1 to 4, how are you feeling about your understanding of these metrics?
Well, hey, Priya and Danielle, this is Connie. While the responses are coming in, I just wanted to call your attention to that there have been some questions in the chat And maybe we can, I'm not sure what your visibility, I know as presenters, sometimes you can't see it, but I'm wondering if maybe among the three of you, we can kind of scroll back and answer some unanswered questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I also saw someone say a handout would be good to refer to, and absolutely, we've developed that. So you should have already received kind of like a high level overview cheat sheet on the rate card, and we also have a much more detailed reference guide that walks through every metric in detail, as well as talks about the data fields you need to capture and how to determine if a metric was achieved. So there will be a lot more resources and support coming your way. But it's good to see here that the majority of people feel like they have at least a strong understanding so far. And as we said, we'll be sending along more materials to hopefully continue to strengthen that understanding. So I think now we can actually go ahead and transition to questions and next steps. And I will pass it over to Haley.
We'll briefly, maybe Haley, before you take over, just to see, I don't know if we will hit every single one of the questions. If we don't verbally right now, we can, we will definitely follow up in writing or in the next session. But I believe there was a question about, in reference to the third caregiver employment metric, whether a family's eligible if they exit before the end of the quarter, and they are eligible for that payment. And some of these other questions, I think I'm seeing one before that's pretty specific to ECIS data entry. So Connie, I don't know if you have that on the spot or if that's one that we are better answering maybe in the next session, which is much more of a deep dive into the data entry process.
Is it the question of whether it's live you're looking at?
No, there's a question about if the caregivers doesn't need to be employed for the whole quarter, then what happens if they're updated to unemployed in the middle of the quarter, but they were employed at some point? How would that sort of be reflected in the ECIS report?
I see. Yeah, there is a quick answer, which is that each update in ECIS is logged separately. So even though you as a user only see the most recent information, the system has kept track of the facts, the updates prior to that. So the fact that they were recorded as being employed at any point during the quarter is registered in the system, and that will be reflected in the reports. So in other words, a caregiver can be employed and then unemployed, and they would indeed get the rate card because they were recorded as being employed at some point during the quarter.
That Danielle just came up with. I know that another one that question that was in here was around timing, and so this will be live as of July 1st. So data reflected on any caregivers that may meet these criteria back to July 1st will be eligible for payments. And I just saw something coming in, and I think any information that has been circulated already will be recirculated along with some of the more detailed resource materials.
Two other questions I just noted. I saw one question, must the caregiver be enrolled for the entire quarter? No, so they can be enrolled and achieve, let's say, a specific criteria for metric 3, and don't have to be sustained through the entire quarter in order to achieve that metric. And then, so another one for caregivers enrolled prior to July 2021 and achieving metrics on prior rate cards, can they be eligible for this one? Yes, under metric 3, that's inclusive of all caregivers served, as long as they're served after July 2021. Are there any other questions? If, I don't know, folks want to come off mute and ask, or you can also follow up with any of these pieces in writing as well, and then resend information afterwards.
So I have a quick question, and I was the person that asked about rate card being live. So what I meant by that is I just went to test to see if I have access to run a rate card report, but it is not there. So that was my question regarding it being live.
I can take that, Jessica. It's Connie. Yeah, you are correct. We took down the old ones and the new ones are still under construction. So that's why they're not there yet. The developers are still building them.
Thank you, Connie.
Yeah, and we obviously, we'll let everyone know when they are, up and ready. But right now, you're absolutely right. They're not there yet.
I'm also seeing one recent question from Michelle about enrolling multiple caregivers. So the way that several of these metrics are structured, there are both the possibility to achieve payments for more than one caregiver for a given family or child. So I might, and that is specifically tied to enrollment of those caregivers. So just the presence of the second caregiver around is not sufficient. It has to be formal enrollment. I don't know if anyone on the OEC team wants to add to sort of the goals and priorities around having both caregivers enrolled. And obviously that's not a circumstance that will apply to every family. But I think that the hope is that when that is an option, that like formal engagement of multiple caregivers involved with the child is a good step to take.
It's Michelle. I just wanted to add to that question. Because Connie, I guess you can answer that we were always putting one caregiver in. If it was just the dad and the mom was not in the picture, he was the enrolled caregiver. If it was just a mom with no dad in the picture, it was just the mom. But now with the rate card, I'm wondering if this would apply to the pregnancy, and would it also apply to employment and education? Because when it is a two-parent family or another male living, another significant other living in the home, should they both be enrolled because of rate card, which we never did in the past. We only had one primary caregiver.
Yeah, I'll jump. Hey, Michelle, I'll jump in, and then maybe, I don't know if anyone else on the OEC team or Annie want to add to, or any of the SoFi team want to add to it. My understanding, I think our understanding is that, being enrolled in home visiting means you get the gamut of services, right? You get all the assessments, you're at all the home visits, you're really like, being enrolled is really being enrolled, right? Like no one should be sort of like kind of sort of enrolled. You're either, you're at all the home visits, you get all the assessments, you get all the services, you have, the relationship with the home visitor. And in that case, you're also enrolled in ECIS, right? All your information is in ECIS. And so we've had two caregivers enrolled in families really since the beginning. We set up ECIS such that we can have, two caregivers, two completely separate home visitors, in fact, where their privacy, the traditional home visitor might not see, the fathering home visitor's information, so we sort of set up ECIS to enable that to be possible. So I would say the bar for whether a caregiver should be enrolled or not hasn't changed. It's really like, are they receiving home visiting services? So I would say kind of by extension, rate card is really intended for enrolled caregivers. So yeah, you might have a really involved dad who's going to the prenatal visits, and, kind of ticked the rate card boxes. But I would say we're still sticking to that, whether the dad should be enrolled really goes back to that initial bar is he also a target of home visiting services? That's
Perfect,
how,
that answers the question. Yep, thank you, Connie.
yeah.
All right, I might move us to next steps unless there are any other key questions.
If we didn't get to your question, we will take back a look through and make sure it's folded into either the next session or the follow-up materials as well. So Haley, I think it's over to you now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so at this point, we're going to just look at some common questions in regard to rate card. And again, we know this is a lot of new information for people. So we are going to do our follow-up session 2, which is for 9/14/21. So just give people an FYI about that. So one of the common questions is, how often will I get paid by the OEC? And so I know we alluded to this before, but that would be every 6 months. Okay. The next common question is, how will the 2021 rate card affect existing data collection? So, you know, as it stipulates here, the only changes to the data collection are the new tracking fields, which we shared before. Number 1, if a caregiver is Puerto Rican, and number 2, dates of prenatal visits. Okay. And I know we had someone ask this before. Can multiple caregivers within one family unit generate payments? I think, as Connie said, yes, if they're enrolled in home visiting, receiving home visits, and achieving the metrics. Another question, and this refers to the payments. The key population enrollment would be for 320. Prenatal enrollment is for 640. Caregiver education and training or employment is for 640 also. And the prenatal and postnatal care are for 730. Now, we're not looking for everybody to memorize these. We will follow up and send an email with this PowerPoint, just so you can go back to it and use it as a resource. And again, when we have our follow-up in session 2, we will get more into ECIS. And again, we know that ECIS might be flying blind for a few of you right now. And so we really want to bring you through to that process. So does anybody have any specific questions related to this or anything that we did not answer at this point? Okay, I think we can go on to the slide. Okay, so this session was meant to serve as an introduction to rate card and the metrics. So it's okay if you haven't digested all of the fine print details. The goal is to start getting, you know, we want you to get familiar with the outcomes being tracked at a high level. As a reminder, training module 2, which will occur on 9/14/21, will be covering the rate card implementation process. Specifically, like I said before, we'll be looking at data and ECIS. It's a general walkthrough. And how to manage this. I know one question I saw someone did ask, I think a home visitor asked, will they be doing the rate card? We'll be working with your clinical supervisor and show them how to make sure that you know, you're doing what you're supposed to do. And that's in session 2 as well. Okay. And so I don't know if anybody has any further questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is the payments going directly to the caregivers or is it going to the program?
So it's going to the program. And there, as we shared previously, there's numerous ways in which people can use this, we could say bonus money, right? We gave some really great examples. And so that would be up to your specific agency.
quarterly reports, are we going to be getting revised quarterly reports, the narrative form that we have to?
Yes, correct. Next week also, when we have our further training, we will be walking through those specific reports too, as well as fiscal. So if there's no other questions, and I know our team, and on behalf of Ashland McCullough, we would just like to thank SoFi, who are amazing partners. I think they did a great job of really giving a thorough description of what rate card is and bringing it to life, and also sharing how you can use it, that money within your organizations. So again, we'd like to thank our SoFi partners for all their help and dedication to the work.
Thank you, Haley and OEC team. And just wanted to have a quick plug there at the end. I know the last slide mentioned that there's an optional survey. So I'm actually just going to post that directly in the team's chat, but that link will also be circulated when you receive slides and other follow-up materials. This is totally optional, but just wanted to hear feedback from the group on how the session went. If you had other thoughts on the rate card design itself, or if you have any specific questions that you would like follow up from your program liaison, you can also insert them there as well. Post that in the chat now. And thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.